Hello, welcome to CIPS Level 4 Revision Tips, Diploma in Procurement and Supply. And this is Module 6, which is Supplier Relationships. And it's Learning Outcome 1, which is to understand the dynamics of relationships in supply chains. So we're going to look at the different types of relationships and then appraise the portfolio analysis techniques that we can use to assess those relationships, the competitive forces that impact the relationship, and the sources of added value. So the term supplier relationship, or SRM, refers to the practice and processes for interacting with suppliers. Now, most supply professionals view SRM as an organised approach to defining what they need and what from a supplier and establishing and managing a company-to-company link to obtain these needs. Now, an organisation has many relationships internally between its functions, and this may include internal suppliers of activities and services like manufacturing or catering, and externally in the form of direct independent suppliers or customers. And that can be in their microenvironment. And in the wider landscape, the external macro environment, this could be through links with the politics, economics, and the environment. There are various types of commercial relationships between buyers and suppliers in the supply chain. Now, the relationship spectrum classifies the 9 types of relationships. Now, the ones on the left are competitive and tactical. They're likely to involve one-off transaction where a relationship is not required. And they're characterised by low trust and limited communication, and each party will do its own problem solving. As you move from left to right on the spectrum, the level of closeness and collaboration between the organisation increases. Relationships on the right-hand side of the spectrum are more collaborative, and they're likely to have a longer duration. And they're characterised by high levels of trust, open communication, and joint problem solving. It's not possible or desirable to create strategic relationships with every supplier. But think about why it is not desirable to create that with every supplier. Would there not be a benefit to the organisation? What are the potential disadvantages of doing this? Now, the type of relationship that develops is determined by the level of power that a buyer and supplier have in a marketplace, and we can refer to Porter's 5 forces for this. So the party, whether that's the buyer or the supplier, will be more powerful, and they will develop the type of supplier relationship that will be beneficial to their business. And after analysing the importance of the contract and the supplier in their organisation, the team can then use this relationship spectrum to ascertain where they need to focus their efforts in order to develop the supplier relationships that will add value. Now, in many firms, activities that are directed towards suppliers are uncoordinated and possibly carried out by different departments, and therefore there's not an integrated or an overall supplier management. But this stands in contrast to the growing expectations that are concerning the impact of the procurement function on overall value creation. An overall framework integrating qualification through performance management and creating innovation can reap many benefits. So you can see here the cycle starts with that relationship, onboarding them and qualifying them. Then you'll segment them to see which ones are the most strategic and which ones give you the greatest level of risk. You'll manage them using KPIs, I guess, in the performance management phase, and you'll either phase them out or you'll go back around the cycle to develop and innovate. Now, the Pareto principle states that approximately 80% of an organisation's spend will be with around 20% of its supply base. These should be strategic suppliers. The principle can be used by an organisation to prioritise its efforts by spending and developing relationships with the strategic suppliers, because these are the ones that are likely to result in greater benefits for the business than developing relationships with suppliers that fall into the low-value goods and services area. Now, in addition to undertaking Pareto analysis, you can use ABC analysis as well. So the A items account for the 80% of cost and 20% of volume. The C's represent low to high volume, and the B's are somewhere in the middle. Now, the time and attention that the resources of procurement should focus their attention on is obviously the category A's. This will give them a better return on the investment of time and resources. Now, Kraljic Matrix can help to identify an organisation's key categories of contracts and suppliers, and it balances the value of the products or services being purchased against the risk. So if you think about the 80-20, the 80-20 will show us the highest cost impact, so they'll be on the top. They'll be on the top of this matrix. But then there's a sliding scale of risk along the bottom. So the higher risk ones will be your strategic ones, but if it's low risk, because there's lots of competition and lots of suppliers, it will sit in the leverage box. So what this indicates is the type of sourcing approach that should be applied and the level of resources that will be required in order to develop and maintain a relationship. So top right hand corner, strategic is high risk, high value. So if you've got a major outsource provider, companies are likely to be a strategic alliance up in this corner. Bottom right hand corner, again, it's quite high risk, low cost, but this is a bottleneck supplier. Usually where you've got a monopoly supplier or somebody who only supplies a particular OEM part. And these companies are likely to have a single sourced relationship. Top left, leverage, high spend but low risk. So it's product specific materials, providers, where you're probably going to have a more closer tactical relationship. There might be sort of one-off large purchases where you don't need an ongoing relationship. And then the bottom left, your routine, or sometimes known as non-critical, these are means of low value, low risk. So it's things like stationery. And it's likely you're just going to have a sort of arm's length relationship with these guys. So Lyson and Farrington suggest that you undertake a number of steps to carry out the segmentation analysis. Make a list of all the purchases in descending order of value, so highest value first, and then evaluate the risk and market complexity of each of these items. And then position them on your Kraljic model based on this analysis, remembering that products and services can move to different segments of the model over time. And that could be as a result of developing the appropriate supplier relationship and strategy. So regular review and the position of each product or service on this model will help you to identify new opportunities. But that's all very well. That's the way we see our supply chain. But what about the way they see us? The supplier preferencing model helps us to understand how suppliers view us as the buying organisation. And it has two axes as well. It looks at the account attractiveness and the relative value of the business. Now, these can fall into four quadrants that reveal how a supplier might view us. An ideal place to be is the core, top right-hand corner. This is where we spend lots of money with them and we're a highly attractive business. And if you find yourself in the core box and from your Kraljic review, they are strategic, this is a match made in heaven, really, because you can work very well because you're sort of singing from the same hymn sheet and it's sort of a relationship that could last. The development ones is where you don't really spend much with them, but you're a very attractive client to them. So they're going to work with you to try and expand what they can buy from you. The exploitable box is where, you do spend lots of money with them, but you're not a very attractive business. And that could be because we don't pay them on time or we're not very prompt with our orders. We leave everything to the last minute. So we're a nuisance almost to work with, but there's lots of money coming our way. So they do want our business. They're just going to exploit us by driving up the price. And the box that nobody wants to be in is the nuisance box, which is you don't spend much of us and you're a nuisance. So they'll either just not serve you at all or, again, maybe exploit you. Now, the market management mix is produced by combining Kraljic and the supplier preferencing model. It gives a more holistic view of the supply positions and supplier preferencing. So the Kraljic model is at the centre and the preferencing model is inserted for each of these on the Kraljic quadrant. And this produces 16 quadrants. And the model helps a buyer to understand where is the requirement now and where do they want to be. Once you've established that, then you may want to put together an action plan. And that may be needed to develop and instigate the relationship. So to this end, we must first determine the objective of the relationship by identifying strategic plans for the organisation. So what is the strategic intent? And how the relationship plays a role in achieving that strategic plan. Then an analysis of the internal and external environment will need to be undertaken. This can include SWOT analysis to look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, the Kraljic analysis, Porter's 5 forces, and any other supplier analysis around the market. And this will be followed by actions to segment the supply market into key suppliers and contracts based on the relationship spectrum, with detailed plans for implementation. This will then be reviewed once actioned. Now, Michael Porter also uses 4 strategies that an organisation can choose from to determine the direction of an organisation. He believes that a company must choose a clear course in order to be able to compete in a marketplace. Now, with cost leadership, the organisation targets a broad range like a large demand and will offer a low price. With differentiation, the organisation targets a broad market, but the product or service has unique features. And with this strategy, you make your product as exclusive as possible. That makes it more attractive than comparable products offered by your competitors. With cost focus, the organisation targets a niche market with little competition and offers the lowest price possible. But again, with the differentiation focus, the organisation targets a niche market with little competition and your product and service has unique features. So the Porter's 5 forces model. This analyses the micro-environmental forces that affect relationships in supply chains. The forces are looking for sources of competitive rivalry, bargaining power of the buyers and of the suppliers, the threat of a new entrant, and the threat of substitutes. Now, the sources of competitive rivalry are at the centre of the model, and the extent of competition depends on the type of market currently in existence. So if you've got a monopoly, which is where you've got the bargaining power of the suppliers, the supplier has the power and the buyer has none, or very little. Now, supplier power weakens as you move through to an oligopoly or an imperfect competition situation, which is oligopoly is a threat of substitutes at the bottom. This is where there'll be between 2 and 10 suppliers. But essentially, they don't really compete on price down there. It's more about my product's better than that product. They're very highly technical, like mobile phone providers, those sorts of things. At the top, threat of new entrants. Again, there's not so much any sort of barriers to people entering in that part of the market, but there is a threat that there's a new entrant coming in. The products generally are slightly different. So much competition, but just offering a different product, and they will compete on price. And then the bargaining power of the buyers on the left-hand side is an almost perfect competition situation. The products and services on offer here are very similar or the same, so you've got a lot of choice. Now, the macro environment involves influences that affect the entire economy of our business and our country. And how much influence the macro economy and the environment has on a company will depend on how interlaced they are. So a common term for this analysis is known as the steeple analysis, each of those letters referencing a macro environmental factor. So if we start with sociocultural, these are factors like our customers, their lifestyles, their values, and these things characterize the society and how they work. T for technological has a huge impact on business as the world becomes more interconnected with systems and networks. So you need to be aware of emerging technology, but as well as things that are potentially becoming out of date. The economy will slowly affect every and all businesses, especially in times of boom or bust. But it looks at things like inflation, exchange rates. The ethics or moral principles that govern a person's behaviour or conducting the procurement, again, there's lots of pressure on us to behave in an ethical manner. So we need to be aware of the things that potentially could be going wrong externally. Political decisions will impact on procurement and supply, especially if politicians impose sanctions or make new trade agreements like Brexit. Legal terms and regulations are laid down by countries and authorities who govern how procurement and supply is undertaken. And there could be legal terms like GDPR and things like that that are coming out all the time. And then the last one is the environmental criteria. And in today's world, we're demanding more sustainable procurement and ethical practices. Now, there's a strong link between developing successful relationships and added value outcomes. Now, developing the relationship is an ongoing process which starts with segmentation and then reviewing where the relationship needs to be in order to get the relationship to that desired state. Now, procurement can support the delivery of that in a number of ways. We can look at things like cashable savings or cost avoidance, which may have a direct impact on internal budgets by working with suppliers to reduce waste. Competitive advantage over others who are not reaping the benefits created by collaborative relationships. Or through risk management, having a greater knowledge of supply chain partners and the risks will improve the process. Improving business efficiency by improving the process in the touch points between the buyer and supplier, like introducing things like e-catalogues, and just improving your corporate social responsibility. Now, although the supplier will provide a price, we must take into account all of the costs. And by identifying and challenging costs, we can add value. Now, the image you can see on the slide shows how total cost of a product is far greater than what we see, just that sort of visible product price or service price. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So the model can consider everything from research and engineering costs, usage and disposal to labour, social and environmental and economical costs depending on the purchase. And so therefore, it's surprisingly named the Priceberg model or the price iceberg. But improving quality can have a direct impact on value add. And it can be achieved through careful supply selection, the use of quality management systems, using our approved suppliers, early buyer involvement, effective specifications, quality control, supplier relationships, and overall monitoring and control. Now, time is a finite resource that must be managed closely. Areas that can be addressed and analysed include discussions with suppliers prior to contract agreement, and that's to establish the actual timings, the reduction of time where feasible and practical, securing on-time delivery and making product development more effective. So accurately negotiate, interpret and verify the supplier's lead times. Try and shorten supplier lead times where possible, reducing our own procurement cycle times. Work with the supplier to ensure on-time delivery and reduce new product development in terms of its idea to market cycle times. Now, just-in-time is a philosophy that should be treated as such. So just-in-time or JIT is where inventory is a strategy of adding value by increasing efficiency and decreasing waste. So we receive the goods only as and when they're needed, and they're pulled through the supply network process by demand. That means we can reduce our inventory costs. And this isn't to be confused with zero stocks, as its sole purpose is to reduce stock and waste to an absolute minimum where possible. Now, ensuring the supplier provides the right quantity of a product or service is one of the sources of added value. that can be achieved through the supply chain relationship. But deciding how much stock to hold is a fine balancing act. If too much is held, cash flow that may be needed for the business is tied up. If too little is held, the business risks running out of stock, which could result in a production downtime or delays for your customer. So the benefits is that you can ensure continuity of supply, reduce your lead times, potentially get discounts by buying in bulk. You can hold stock to protect you against any price fluctuations, and it can support demand management. But the cost of it is the storage space, the capital that you will need to outlay, the risk of obsolescence where products become out of date, or opportunity cost where that money that you've invested in stock could have potentially been used on an alternative product or an alternative project. So the just-in-time method can be used to ensure that the correct quantities of stock are available at the times that we need them, at the same time as avoiding a cost of stocking out. Now, the reorder level is the stock level of a particular item or that you're holding in your inventory. And it's at that point that a new order needs to be placed to replenish the order. The quantity is the magnitude of the number of order units that need to be placed. So in this diagram, we can see how the reorder quantity is used over a period of time and how the reorder level signals the requirement of a new supply. Now, by ensuring stock is ordered in good time and kept at the correct level, it is possible to ensure the service levels of orders are maintained or even exceeded in terms of adding value to the supply process. And vendor managed inventory is a streamlined approach to inventory management and order fulfillment. It involves collaborating between buyers and suppliers, which require changes to the traditional ordering process. So inventory is being managed and ordered by the supplier, and sometimes being held as consignment stock at the buyer's premises. Now, the goal of VMI is to align the business objectives and streamline our supply chain operations for both the buyer and supplier. The business value is to, create a direct result of increased information flow, which improves inventory turnover, customer service, and sales. Now, in terms of place, the buying organisation will need to consider the mode of transport being used. Shipping by road has some advantages. You have greater flexibility than you can do by train. Transport is direct rather than go-betweens needed with a train, and transit times are often shorter. Rail shipping has several benefits. It's cost-effective and environmentally friendly because trains use less fuel than trucks to transport goods across the country. Sea transport will include container ships, bulk carriers, and tankers, and they carry most of the world's goods, while bulk carriers transport raw materials like coal and iron ore, and tankers transport oil, petroleum, and other chemicals. Shipments by air can cost the most, but will deliver in the fastest time. Now, light shipments that need to be arrived quickly will benefit from plane shipments. In 2017, Amazon shipped over £200 million of goods by air, leasing planes from 2 different airlines. Sourcing from overseas will extend the lead times and increase the risks due to natural disasters, frontiers, poor infrastructure, fraud and piracy, just to name a few. And finally, supply chain management. This is the management of the flow of information, the goods and services, and it'll include all processes that transform raw materials into a final product. It involves the active streamlining of a business supply chain activity to maximize customer value and gain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. The objective is to satisfy and in fact delight the end customer. Thank you for watching.